Okay, everyone, good evening. Well, let me just make sure the recording, it's working, okay. Oh, there it is, great. All right, good evening, everyone. And tonight we have a class that raises tremendous intrigue. If we were live, I would ask everyone to raise your hands if it intrigues you. Where we go again? Understanding reincarnation. In fact, this morning someone came over to me and asked me about reincarnation. Last week I received an email about reincarnation. There's one very common question about reincarnation, which we will explain tonight. I will explain to the best of my ability. And there's intrigue, because we want to know. There's a book that some of you may have read. I think it's called Many Masters, Many Lives, actually by a Jewish psychotherapist, if I'm not mistaken. People are just fascinated by what was going on in their previous life. Who was I? How does that affect me now? These are all very, very common questions. And hopefully we're going to this is the most thorough class we've ever taught on reincarnation. So we're going to get into more details than we've ever gotten into in the past. So that's a good thing. Okay, so it's interesting because, part of the reason why it's intriguing is that it combines our current life with our past life. We know a little bit about our current life, or maybe a lot, but we don't really know much about our past life. And this whole idea of having a recycled soul, I don't know how that feels. Recycled goods. Am I a recycled person or am I an original? So this is a lot of what comes up when we think about reincarnation. And there are also other points that reincarnation raises, which can be disconcerting or fascinating. On one side of it, it demonstrates an element of immortality, because we are, and those who have already passed on will be again. So it's not like things really end. There's something maybe encouraging or promising about that on one hand. So we don't feel like we're just this worthless life that lives and expires. I mean, of course, we know better than that from the previous 4 lessons of our course. But for someone who just, doesn't know what we did, is not taking the course, and and hears about the concept of reincarnation, that could be a little bit encouraging just for that. On the other hand, though, it's like, is my personality me, or is my personality some baggage I'm carrying from, the guy before me? And which is not really exciting to learn about. And like I said before, am I just a recycled soul that just showed up again and carrying baggage, from what some guy did in the past lifetime? I'm schlepping around now, and I have to deal with all these issues, bringing it into everything that I interact with. Doesn't sound very fair. There, are these creating impediments in my life now? The things that my soul, if you will, assuming that that's accurate, which it isn't, we'll find out. Assuming that my soul, messed up in the previous, and now I have these obstacles in my life now. So the more we, as we go through tonight's class, we're going to actually see that how Judaism teaches us about reincarnation is actually very encouraging. Actually, it's very it's very helpful to actually understand it, and it's a little bit different than the way others understand it, such as Eastern religions, where reincarnation may be popular. So we really need to understand the differences. So if you go to exercise 5.1 on page 175 in your book, you're going to see, again, we're not in person here, but you can circle T for true, F for false. Belief in reincarnation is basic to Judaism. Well, you may have figured that out already. Number two, in the Jewish view, reincarnation means that a soul that inhabited one body returns to inhabit another. Is that correct? Is it that, the soul inhabited one body, now it's coming back to inhabit another body? Which raises, by the way, this notion raises the big question people always ask. This is the number one reincarnation question I get is, well, the number one question is, do we believe in reincarnation? But once we establish that, then the question is, if my soul lived in a different body and I was reincarnated into this body and then reincarnated into another body, at resurrection of the dead, which is a fundamental Jewish belief, as we've discussed, when the soul is resurrected, which body does it come back in? My body or the other guy's body? Right? Which is a very obvious question. So we're gonna get to the answer. We're gonna get to the answer of that. If that's your question, that's like a super popular question for anyone that's thinking. You have to have that question. Yeah. Okay. Great. So yeah, we're gonna get to the baggage and the good. Does the good and the wisdom of the previous life also carry into this life? We're going to get to all of that soon. The answer is going to be the same, actually, once we understand it. Number three is a human soul can be reincarnated in a non-human entity, such as an animal or plant. Can a human soul come into an animal or plant? True or false? Well, it's making a statement that it can. Is that true or false? Just based on what you, I guess, think or maybe have learned. A reincarnated soul does not have its own identity, but shares its identity with someone who lived in a previous lifetime. We have a shared identity. It's not my identity. It's the identity of a whole bunch of lives before me as well. Is that true or false? I'm going through this to let you know we're going to have the answer to all these statements as to whether they're true or false at the end of the class. The purpose of doing good in one's current lifetime is to be reincarnated as a person of higher status. This is a common belief regarding reincarnation, especially in Eastern religions, which should tell you what the Jewish perspective then is, as I'm differentiating here, but we'll get to it. A soul is reincarnated as a penalty for sins committed in a prior life. Is that why souls are reincarnated? Penalty. There's a flag on the play. We're going to have to reincarnate this soul. Is that what's going on? And lastly, most souls today are reincarnations. Is that true? We're going to find it all out within the next 80 minutes. So here we go. So let's establish, number one, that reincarnation is a Jewish belief. And in fact, we have a prayer that we say every night, which you may or may not be familiar with. If you open up a prayer book and you look, so you have in a traditional prayer book, you have the morning prayers, mincha, that's called shacharis. Then you have mincha prayers, which is the afternoon prayer. Ma'ariv is the evening prayer. And right after the Ma'ariv prayer, you have, it's called Kriyas Shema, the reading of the Shema, Shalamita, which we say on our bed. I mean, you don't have to say it on your bed. Most people don't say it when they're in, many people don't say it when they're in bed, but it's when we go to bed. That's what it's for. So in that, it's not just the Shema, but you have other prayers as well. And the prayer that we open up with is a prayer of forgiveness. We're not going to discuss the forgiveness, which we did in a different JLI course. That will sidetrack us tonight. But we just want to bring out one point here. And if you go to text number 1, you'll see, here's the prayer. Master of the universe, I hereby forgive anyone who has angered or vexed me or sinned against me, either physically or financially, against my honor or anything else that is mine, whether accidentally or intentionally, inadvertently or deliberately, by speech or by deed, in this incarnation or in any other. Boom, there you have it. This is a daily prayer that we say, unless it's a Shabbos or Yom Tov, then we skip this prayer. But otherwise, we say this practically every day, and we refer to reincarnation. That whether this person or this soul offended me in this incarnation or previous incarnation, I forgive him. So that's just a way to demonstrate to you that the fact that reincarnation is a Jewish belief. But we need to clarify, and what we're going to clarify how exactly how reincarnation works based on the teachings of Kabbalah. Okay, which is Jewish mysticism, because Jewish mysticism deals with mystical things, and reincarnation is a somewhat mystical thing. I don't think any of us here actually have mastered or have a PhD in reincarnation. But Kabbalah does actually, and there's actually a book called Shar HaGilgulim, which we're going to have a whole number of, which means the gate of reincarnation in Jewish mysticism, where we have many a good number of texts in our class tonight, because that's the primary authority on reincarnation, and we're going to see how reincarnation actually adds greater purpose, peace, and trust and resilience to our lives once we understand reincarnation properly. And pretty much everything we're going to be discussing is from the teachings of Kabbalah. The word Kabbalah means lekabel, to receive, because Kabbalah are the esoteric teachings of the Torah, which were given to Moses orally at Mount Sinai, but they were passed down, unlike the main oral law, which Moses taught to the entire Jewish people. Kabbalah and mysticism was only taught to select people who passed it on to select people. And then in the last about 400 or 500 years, the Kabbalists actually revealed the importance of it in this day and age to be expanding these teachings. And that's why we have, they're more widespread today. That's a very general synopsis of Kabbalah. There's a lot more to be said about it. There's a lot more to be said about people teaching Kabbalah, which is disassociated with practice of Judaism, which obviously should be obvious to all of us that obviously is problematic. Something is off over there. But all of these teachings are going to be from Kabbalah. So let's start with the splitting of the atom. But this is a different atom. It wasn't ATOM, but it's atom. Okay, we're going to start with a very fundamental idea which we need to understand. Because in our previous classes, we learned that the soul, where does the soul go? We just learned this last week. Where does the soul go after it leaves this world? Well, it goes through the car washing machine, gets cleaned up a little bit. And then where does it go? It goes to heaven. Every soul goes to heaven. So what's this whole story with reincarnation? Reincarnation, we already established that the soul doesn't come back down. It goes to heaven. We were very clear about that. And that every single soul, except for, the 0.0001% of the extreme evil, that maybe they don't, but pretty much everyone does. So what is the story with reincarnation? Scott, do you have a question?
In a more general sense, and I don't know if you'll get to it tonight in the context of reincarnation.
Okay.
I struggle with the notion of, if I have a single life but my soul is eternal, then the value of that single life, the experience of that single life, is infinite, because it must last in essence for an eternity. If I have many lives, or for that matter, if I could possibly have an infinite number of lives, then the value of any one particular life in the world of infinity becomes incredibly small. That is, each of our experiences in this one life is incredibly small in the grand experience. And I haven't quite reconciled that.
Yeah. I hope that by the end of the class, I hope you won't have to reconcile it.
Okay.
That's okay.
I trust you.
So yeah, thank you. Well, you see, there's one core, I think pretty common misunderstanding about reincarnation, which raises most of our questions. And I'm going to do my best. I've tried in past times that we've learned about reincarnation to explain it. I'm going to do my best to explain it even better tonight, so that it's more clear, and we're spending more time on it. We're giving it more of its due justice tonight. So I hope that the subject will be much clearer than we've discussed in the past. So there's as I mentioned, so the Arizal, who is the teacher of Lurianic Kabbalah, because the Arizal was Rabbi Isaac Luria. He was a great mystic and Kabbalist. He was a great Kabbalist that lived in the city of Tzfat. He died at a young age. I think it was 38, if I'm not mistaken, 36, 38. But what he accomplished in his short span of life was just unbelievable in what he loved. And he was a deep man of God and mysticism. And he had a student by the name of Rabbi Chaim Vital who wrote down many of his teachings. And one of the things that Rabbi Chaim Vital includes in one of his books, I think it's called Shara Kavanos, if I remember correctly. Let me see. Anyway, whatever it is, I don't know if I got the right book there, but he has a chapter called Sha'ar HaGilgulim, the gate of reincarnation. A lot of times in these books, they refer to each chapter as a gate. So he refers to it as the gate of reincarnation, and he really spells out and breaks down exactly how reincarnation works. And that's very helpful, and that's really what much of tonight's class is based on. So he starts with a fundamental idea which we need to understand, okay? And again, we know this from Kabbalistic teachings. There is really no other way for us to know. So I don't have access to such information in any way, nor do I know anyone that does. But the great Kabbalists did, and that's how we know this. And I'm reiterating that because we can ask, as we've done in the past, is like, how do you know? So this is how we know. I just want you to know how we know, and that's the best I can tell you about how we know. So let's read text number 2. Howard, do you mind, Bernheim? Do you mind reading text number 2? Thank you.
Sure. It all began with one master soul, the soul of Adam, which included all future souls. Subsequently, this master soul passed on to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and was then divided among the 12 tribes. Afterward, the soul was further partitioned among the 70 souls, the descendants of Jacob, that accompanied him to Egypt, and eventually among the 600,000 souls who left Egypt.
Okay, fantastic. So this is really key and fundamental in understanding reincarnation. So God creates a master soul, which is the soul of Adam, the first of man. And then God takes that soul, that master soul, and he puts it into, Adam passes away, he takes that master soul and puts it into Abraham. And essentially Abraham transfers it to Isaac, to Jacob, and then from there it's the 12 tribes and the descendants that really are the creation of the Jewish people. We know that it says, we have a reference of 600,000 at Mount Sinai. There were about 3 million people at Mount Sinai. I'm not going to get into the specifics of that number right now, but there are 600,000 root souls. And this is very key in understanding reincarnation. To understand that there are root souls, there is the master soul. Okay, we'll say for our sake, it's Abraham. And then from the master soul, there are 600,000 root souls. These are, we'll say, primary souls. I mean, root souls is really probably the best way to refer to them. Now we know that many more Jews than 600,000 have lived in the world. Even at the time of Mount Sinai, there were more than 600,000 Jews. This 600,000 then subdivide into really an endless number of souls. Each one of those 600,000 root souls are subdivided. It's sort of, think of it like we saw in the image here, think of it like a tree. And a tree has branches which give off more branches, which give off more branches. So there are we'll call them here primary branches or root branches that come off of the stem, which is the master. And then off of those root or primary branches, you have many, many more subdivided branches. That is how the souls actually work. Every soul is a piece of God. It's a piece of infinity. but it's broken down in this manner. And through understanding this, we can begin to understand what's behind reincarnation. So someone asked, what about non-Jewish people? So we actually have teachings that tell us that non-Jewish souls also can be reincarnated. Okay, that's the extent of what I can tell you now, but we know that certain non-Jewish souls that were reincarnated. So non-Jews can be reincarnated as well. So let's go now to text number 3. Michael, you mind reading text 3, Michael Rabinowitz? Thank you.
Sure. Furthermore, you must know that every person must fulfill all of the 613 mitzvot. If a soul does not fulfill all 613 mitzvot in action, speech, and thought, it must be reincarnated until it completes them all.
Okay. So every root soul needs to fulfill. Let me actually add a little bit here. Every root soul has a mission. And because every one of us that God puts in this world, God puts in this world with a purpose. And the purpose is to reveal God's presence. That is actually our purpose. And if you listen to my podcast the last Monday, I did my best to elaborate on that. It's to reveal God's purpose. We are God's agents here in this world to make sure the world knows that the world is not an independent being, but it's actually very dependent on a source, which is God. And we were given this mission at Mount Sinai when God chose us as a people to reveal God's presence. The way we do that, primarily, like the if you will, the technical path, is through the fulfillment of the 613 commandments. By living according to God's will, we are testimony of the fact that there is a God in the world. And when we do that, we rectify and elevate both our body and our soul. Our soul also gets elevated because now it has fulfilled its mission. So, and we also elevate the world which we are interacting with whenever we are doing an act which is revealing the reality of God. Here's the thing, though. It's few, if any, souls, root souls, or any souls, even the subdivided souls, actually complete their the 613 mitzvot during their first lifetime. Arguably, it takes a good number of lifetimes till a soul actually fulfills the 613 commandments. Reincarnation exists in order to give the soul the ability to fulfill its purpose in this world. So, yeah, okay. So we have a question here that before Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, there were millions and millions of people. That's correct. There were millions and millions of people. Were they reincarnated souls or not? I have no idea. So I'm not sure what your question is. You're implying a question here with that, Leonid. The main thing is that the actual mission in fulfillment of the creation of the world began more comprehensively and really took on its mission when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai and chose the Jewish people to be his agents in being a light unto the nations, which means to reveal the light of the reality of God in the world. And so therefore, that's the reason why the master soul was reimplanted in Abraham and continues through the Jewish people. So I'm not sure if that's answering your question or not, but and that's why we were given the Torah through which we are meant to fulfill this obligation. There's another element beyond just the fulfillment of the 613 commandments. And this other element is related to the study of Torah. That every root soul has. Every root soul has a particular mission with the study of Torah. Let's read text number 4. Let's see, who can we get to read? Arlene, would you mind reading text number 4? Thank you.
You should also realize that each individual must study all 4 of the Torah's layers, which are referred to by their acronym PARDIS, orchard. These are Peshat, Remez, Derush, and Sod. Literal, allusion, exegetic, and mystical. It is necessary for a soul to be reincarnated repeatedly until it completes all of them.
Wow. So what we find is that every soul, in addition to having to engage in the different, I refer to them as dimensions of Torah study, because there's we're going to see a beautiful video to explain this in a minute, but there's a simple meaning of a verse, and then there are allusions in the verse, and then there are derivations that can be derived from a verse, and then there is the mystical element of the verse, and then not only there isn't just one mystical explanation to a verse, there can be thousands of mystical explanations to a verse, many different explanations. In fact, our Kabbalistic teachers tell us that for every verse there are 600,000 pshat, there are 600,000 understandings to every single verse, right? So we may study 3 or 4, if someone's a real scholar, maybe 8, 10, 15, 20 explanations to a verse, but there are an endless number. And it's not that one person studies all of them, it's that different people, based on their root soul, are inclined to different areas of Torah study and develop like novel interpretations that may not have been revealed in the world before this person. That's part of our soul mission. However, part of our soul mission is to engage at least in somewhat in every one of the 4 areas of Torah study as well. In fact, let's go back to the Arizal, the great mystic, the author of the Luriana Kabbalah. The Arizal used to say that when he would go to sleep at night, okay, again, this is not something, I don't know what you dream about at night, but based on my dreams, I cannot relate at all to this, but it's good to know that that this exists and has existed. He said that when he would sleep at night, he would learn 800 explanations more than when he was awake. Like his awake state limited him and his ability. But when we're asleep, we're somewhat detached from our body. And that gave him the ability to actually go deeper and have another 800 explanations. So it just shows us how deep and profound the Torah is. And we know this once someone starts studying the Torah on a text level from the Hebrew, you begin to realize how endless a single verse is in its interpretation. So let's watch this great, we're going to watch this great video that really brings it out, and will give us a sampling of, it's going to give us a sampling of the, of each one of these 4 interpretations.
Human authors express themselves in their works, both directly and subtly, sometimes intentionally and always subconsciously. When we read a text, we can choose either to read the lines or to engage in more intricate analysis and read between the lines. The divine author of the Torah did something similar, but to an infinitely greater degree. God expressed himself in the text in multiple ways all at once, directly as well as subtly, with plenty of insinuation and a vast hidden layer of the divine subconscious. And he then instructed us to excavate it all. Jewish tradition separates these layers of understanding into 4 categories. The first is Peshat, direct intention, which is derived by examining context and syntax. For example, the Torah begins with the words, Bereshis bara Elokim, es hashemayim, ve'es haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. On the plainest level of Torah understanding, this is a straightforward statement of what happened at the beginning of time. But the simple meaning is not always easy to clarify. Many biblical commentators, most notably Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, The 11th century French scholar known universally as Rashi devoted their efforts to clarifying the straightforward meaning of the often mysterious biblical texts. Our second layer of understanding is remez, allusion. This refers to subtle communications that are encoded in the text. They can be uncovered using methods such as the numerical values of the Hebrew letters, the acronyms of words and phrases, or unusually sized letters in the Torah scroll. For example, the Torah's first two words, Bereshis bara, in the beginning, God created, carry the numerical value of 1,116. That's the identical value of the phrase Barosh Hashanah Nivra. It was created on Rosh Hashanah. We are thereby informed that Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of creation. Our third layer of understanding is drush, interpretive. Our sages extrapolate a vast corpus of ideas and instruction from the Torah's text through methods such as textual comparison, sequencing analysis, and homiletical interpretation. For example, from a sequencing perspective, the Torah begins with the wrong beginning. It describes creation, a narrative that is seemingly secondary to the Torah's primary function as a book of guidance that tells us how God expects us to act on a daily basis. The Torah should have dived directly into the nitty-gritty of the laws. On the interpretive level, however, the Torah first describes creation to tackle a major hurdle to Torah observance. The majority of Torah laws rely on the Jewish nation owning and settling the land of Israel. We were instructed to conquer the land and never relinquish our claim of ownership over it. But such a radical claim to a territory is bound to provoke opposition. Who gives us the right to take possession of a land and claim it as our eternal heritage? The Torah, therefore, begins with creation, clarifying that God is the creator of all territories, and he has the right to permanently bequeath a specific parcel to a particular people. It then records the history of God doing precisely that with the Jewish people. With this switch in sequence, the Torah supplies the Jews with the response God expects them to provide all who accuse them of land theft and occupation. The fourth layer of understanding is sod, hidden meaning. This refers to the deeply mystical messages that float behind every phrase and letter in the Torah. For example, the word Bereshis can be split perfectly into two words, bara, shis, meaning he created six. God first formed the six emotive divine attributes, from chesed, kindness, through yesod, attachment, as described in Jewish mysticism. God then used these six attributes to create the actual universe. So there you have a sampling of the four layers of understanding that can be found in the Torah's very first words. Beyond this, a vast ocean of knowledge is contained in these same words. And beyond that stretches the infinite vastness of wisdom contained in the rest of the Torah's close to 80,000 words.
Wow. Okay. I love that video. I think that video is fantastic. So that should, whoops, 1 second. So that should give us a somewhat of a sense of how these four different levels of interpretation work. And we need, every soul when it comes to this world, in order for it to fulfill its purpose, needs to engage in these four levels of Torah study. And what are we doing right now? We're engaging with the sod, the esoteric level. That's the fourth level. That's what we're doing right now tonight as we discuss reincarnation. So we're making sure we cover all bases for all of us here. We probably covered all four already in this course. However, every soul actually has an attachment to a particular form of study. And you know that based on the type of interpretation that you're attracted to. So by way of example, some people wonder, why am I so consumed with, the book that I wrote and that type of those ideas? Why am I so consumed with that? And you know what the answer is? Because I am. because my soul is just attracted to the more psychological, spiritual dimension. I don't know. That's just who I am, and that's what I'm attracted to. And so that's where I go when I want to study things that I am particularly attracted to. And that's true for every single one of us. You have certain people are good at math. Some people love chemistry. Everyone's got their thing because that's the way we're designed. So that doesn't relieve us of studying elements of every one of the four interpretations, but we do need to also delve into the area that is actually unique to who we are as an individual. And if the soul doesn't do that, then the soul needs to be reincarnated. So it will do it at some point. So if you go to figure 5.1, or if you just simply look at the screen, the mission of the soul is to complete all 613 mitzvot. It's to study all four layers of the Torah, and it's to reveal its unique portion in the Torah. And that's why we have a prayer that we say right at the end of the Amidah every day, which is text 5a. Yehi ratzon milfanecha. May it be your will, our God and God of our fathers, that the holy temple be rebuilt speedily in our days, and grant us our portion in your Torah. What? Our portion? What's my portion in the Torah? That is the portion that is aligned with my particular type of a soul. My particular soul, I should say, not type of soul, my particular soul. That's what it is. How do I know what that is? Well, we're going to discuss this a little bit towards the end, later in the class, but it's the areas that we are naturally attracted to. That's how you know, because you just like this style of teaching. So now we're going to discuss the mechanism of reincarnation, because I know there are a bunch of questions here, but we're going to be slowly, as we explain more and more, I think we're going to be answering most, if not all of your questions. And that is regarding souls and whether we are recycled souls. And the good news is that your soul is not recycled. So let's read text number 6, and then I'll start explaining this point, which is the cause of a lot of the confusion and questions regarding reincarnation. Maud, would you mind reading text number 6 for us? Thank you.
Although we have stated in numerous passages of this treatise that a specific individual soul was reincarnated in a particular person, and it was subsequently reincarnated in another specific individual, and so on, do not misread this as implying that the original soul itself is reincarnated repeatedly. Rather, each human soul branches out to innumerable roots. Every root contains an infinite quantity of soul sparks. With each subsequent reincarnation, a number of these sparks are rectified, and they ascend to enjoy the rewards of heaven and dwell in the particular strata of Gan Eden that are appropriate for them. However, those soul sparks are not rectified, that were not rectified, are reincarnated to provide further opportunity for rectification.
Okay, thank you. So let me try and explain this in a fashion that I hope will relieve us of some of the questions that we have. Imagine there are 600,000 root souls. Imagine that one root soul has 1 million sparks to it. I start my life, or you start your life, whoever it may be, and we come from this particular root soul that has 1 million sparks to it, and we live our life. The more sparks that we actually engage and redeem, if you will, by making sure this spark lives out or actualizes its purpose, the more sparks that become a part of my soul, which is an extension, a branch of this particular root soul. So let's say through a lifetime, 50,000 of those sparks are, elevated. Then this soul made up of 50,000 sparks goes to heaven. And this soul of 50,000 sparks is associated with this particular person, this body. When there is a resurrection of the dead, the two come back together. What happens to the other 950,000? That is reincarnation. Those sparks, because they were not actualized or they did not fulfill their purpose, they get reincarnated into other people. So it's actually not a soul that leaves this world and comes back. The actual soul that lived and actualized does not come back. It is associated sparks with that soul that come back. I hope that helps with some of the questions, and you can let me know if you're still bothered by something. In the meantime, you can write a question or just unmute yourself and ask if you'd like to. So if we let's actually go back to our screen over here to help us out, and you'll see here that we have rectified sparks. Those are sparks that we rectified through our life. The mitzvah that were properly observed elevated into certain sparks. And then there are unrectified sparks of the soul, which are positive mitzvah that were not performed or Torah violations that were transgressed. So what happens is the rectified sparks ascend to Gan Eden, to paradise, to heaven. And the unrectified sparks become the foundational spark of a new soul. That actually is what forms a new soul, which we call reincarnated, because these are all extensions of the root soul, which is one of 600,000. All right, take it in, everyone. Everyone's absorbing it slowly. One way that it's explained in one of the commentators is when someone has a limb, God forbid, that is infected, we'll say. So some infections can be treated, and through treating it, the limb, it gets restored to its full vigor and can operate as it did before. God forbid, in an extreme situation, the limb needs to be amputated. So what happens when a person lives out their life is that the sparks, such as in the analogy, the limbs that actualize their purpose, they go to heaven. The limbs which haven't, they're sort of, if you will, amputated from this soul. This soul is complete, and they go on to form an entirely different new soul, although it's still from the same root soul. So we have here, so every reincarnated spark that descends comes back in a deficit state. I'm going to need I need that to be elaborated on for me to understand it. Not every reincarnated spark that descends comes back in a deficit state. It comes back in a state of not having finished its mission, and it needs to finish its mission. Once that spark does finish its mission, it remains attached to the person who, through whom it finished its mission, and then it goes to heaven. So I think that you are correct if I understand what you're writing. That's correct. Does that impact our purpose? Well, it does impact our purpose because different sparks are associated with different types of either mitzvot, which this root soul has not yet fulfilled. And that's what this spark is associated with, and that would be our mission. The question is, how should we know that? That's a good question. And I'm going to I'll tell you, jumping ahead, that the answer is what I told you before about in regards to the study of Torah. Our soul naturally draws us in the direction of what it needs. And that's how we know. So, and we're going to see more about this soon. So where is the positive that is carried forward? The positive is the soul that goes into heaven. That's all the positive, which is a whole lot of positive. And it goes to heaven. So if you will, it retires. It goes into the Hall of Fame. I don't know exactly what analogy you want to use, but that's really what's happening. It's if that makes sense. So all we have to do to know what our mission is to look at what is going on in our lives, what's right before us. And if we do that with open eyes and honesty, we will be able to identify what our mission is. Like if you see in text number 12, the second paragraph, so saintly individuals with spiritual vision perceive the locations in which their divine sparks await their engagement, and they take the initiative to journey to those locations. I suspect none of us have done that, but the rest of us are left in the hands of the primary cause behind all causes and the ultimate reason behind all reasons. God orchestrates countless apparent causes and circumstances to bring specific individuals to the locations in which their predestined service of rectification is required. There is a reason why you live where you live. There's a reason why you're married to or related to whoever it is that you're related to. There's a reason why you are working in a certain industry. Beyond just the fact that I chose to live here. There's a deeper current to all of that. That's what we need to realize. And so when we look at our strengths and our passions, we can identify what our mission is. When we look at our circumstances, we can identify what our mission is. When we look at our weaknesses and struggles, we can identify what our mission is. We're going to watch a great video to help us implement this. Okay, here we go. This is very good.
Today's reflection is going to help us try to relate to the idea that our souls came to the world this time around for a special purpose. A mitzvah, a good act that has special value in this lifetime. Now, how can we know such a thing? To a great extent, we can't. However, there's a way that we can catch a glimpse into what is important for the soul in this lifetime. And that is by way of a metaphor which we will now visualize. Picture in your mind's eye, you are leading an army out to battle. If the militaristic imagery is not to your liking, you can imagine a game of chess. The same idea applies. You're leading your army out to battle, and you begin to become aware that your opponent, your enemy, is focused on striking you in one particular spot. Now, it hadn't occurred to you that this spot has importance, but from the fact that the enemy keeps focusing on it, keeps going after it, we begin to realize that it must have strategic importance to the enemy. As you're imagining this, shift now and think about your life and think about a mitzvah or a good deed that is inordinately difficult for you. And by inordinately, what I mean is this. We all have mitzvahs that are harder and easier for all of us. But then there are mitzvahs that by all rights should be easy. It shouldn't be so challenging, and for some inexplicable reason, we just keep having resistance in that area. Why are we having inexplicably more resistance in that area? Why? Because it has that much more strategic importance, and therefore all things in the universe being counterbalanced, our Maker has allowed a special resistance, a special challenge to give us pushback in that one area that we most need to overcome. So imagine, connect to yourself, think of yourself, think of that area, that mitzvah that's the hardest for you, the one that keeps on challenging you. And now imagine it, rather than as something that you're frustrated about, imagine it as your most precious asset. So precious that the enemy is specifically focusing on it. Let's take a moment to try to think of that mitzvah that is the most difficult, and to now see it as that mitzvah which in this lifetime is apparently the most important and most impactful. We'll take a moment now to envision this, to connect to this feeling. Feel yourself being empowered, knowing that this mitzvah has so much power, so much influence, and that is where the resistance is coming from.
Okay, so how do we identify our personal mission, our strengths and passions, identify our mission, our weaknesses and struggles, as we just heard? And by the way, you know what I was thinking is, actually I'll get to that in 1 second, and our circumstances also help us identify our personal mission. If you in fact take that meditation seriously, which of course you should, and so should I, and we think about we truly think about a mitzvah that we have an issue with. You know, Jews have issues with things. You know, we don't just say that, you know, I don't like that mitzvah. We have an issue with the mitzvah. It doesn't fit into our worldview. It doesn't fit into the way we believe how things should be, whatever that may be, right? That actually affords us a tremendous opportunity, because when we choose to engage with it, despite that challenge, to discover, like, let me actually get a taste for this thing that I feel is so problematic. Let me actually get a taste for it and see what it really is. And if there's anything more to it than I know. Very often when we do that, we actually discover that what we're dealing with is quite different or more profound than we thought. So I'm just putting that out there as an opportunity in our conversation here, because after all, that may be the spark that your soul needs to elevate, or that my soul needs to elevate. So we can't just gloss over something like that. It's quite significant. So let's come back to what the list we discussed in the beginning of the class. Okay, belief in reincarnation is basic to Judaism. We asked if that's true or false. Well, belief in reincarnation is a belief in Judaism. Is it basic to Judaism? Maybe the word basic is not exactly accurate, because it's not like a fundamental point of Judaism that Judaism is based on. But Judaism does believe in reincarnation. Number two, in the Jewish view, reincarnation means that a soul that inhabited one body returns to inhabit another. Is it true that a soul that inhabited one body returns to inhabit another? Well, it's a yes and no. I'm going to say more no than yes. The soul that fulfilled and raised sparks in this life go to heaven. It's all the souls that were not raised, or that became blemished through doing a wrongdoing, that is what is reincarnated. So it's really not a soul that lived a life that's reincarnated. The soul that lived a life goes to heaven, and the remainder, if you will, that was not activated, then becomes a new soul in a new body. A human soul can be reincarnated in a non-human entity such as an animal or plant. True or false? That is true, as we learned. That can happen. A reincarnated soul does not have its own identity, but shares its identity with someone who lived in a previous lifetime. That is incorrect, right? As we learned. So it has a relation to a previous lifetime because it comes from the same root soul, but it's an entirely independent soul. Number 5, the purpose of doing good in one's current lifetime is to be reincarnated as a person of higher status in future reincarnation. That is not the Jewish view of reincarnation. The reason why we are reincarnated is not to come back into the world on a higher level. That is a Eastern religion concept, which has nothing to do with Judaism. Number 6, a soul is reincarnated as a penalty for sins committed in the prior lifetime. Well, let's first get rid of that word penalty. It's not a penalty. As we learned last week, it's a consequence. And it's more of a rehabilitation than it is a penalty. So yes, when the sparks of the soul do things which are not aligned with its mission, then those sparks are reincarnated. Most souls today are reincarnations. That is correct. So that really sums up most of almost everything we did. And we're just going to conclude with a teaching from Viktor Frankl, and then one final teaching after that. So Viktor Frankl, as many of you know, he wrote the book Toward Man's Search for Meaning. If you never read the book, I strongly encourage you to read the book. It's a phenomenal book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Very worthwhile read. He's a Holocaust survivor, and he learned from the Holocaust, from the camps, that the most fundamental need every human being has is the need for meaning, for personal mission in life. And this whole conversation about reincarnation actually is all about the fact that every soul is put into this world with a mission. That's very empowering for a person to know that. Arguably, one of the great challenges we have in our modern day society is that a lot of kids don't know that. They're not being raised with that. That they were put here by the master of all existence for a divine purpose. That's very, very empowering. So when we know that we have a purpose that gives us determination to attain a goal, it gives us strength to overcome obstacles because we're on a mission, as we say. It changes our attitude towards circumstances because we know if this is a divine mission that God gives us circumstances, we don't fall into circumstances. So we're not prisoners of circumstance, but our life is designed in a particular way for us to know what our mission is. Finding the potential within suffering. We don't just look at suffering as randomness, but we realize it's all part of a divinely orchestrated movement, and we seize every moment. So it's really very powerful when it's ingrained within us that we're here with a mission. And reincarnation is all emphasizing the idea that the soul is here with a mission. So I want to conclude with one last point. And this last point is the fact that one thing we do know, the Arizal, right, who I quoted a few times tonight, of the author of the Ryan Kabbalah, he wrote that the souls of the last generation before the coming of Mashiach, which we believe is this time, during our era. So our sages say that the souls of the women during this era are souls reincarnated from the women who lived when the Jews left Egypt. Isn't that interesting? I don't know what you think about that, but maybe after I explain it, you'll appreciate it. So in what merit did the Jews leave Egypt? It was in the merit, the Talmud says this, our sages, the rabbis. So they actually say, those rabbis say that the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt in the merit of the faith of the Jewish women. Now, I don't know if you know this or not. To me, it's as clear as day, but women have much more natural faith than men do. That's my personal experience. And I know that whatever, right? Some of you may take offense to that. I'm just telling you my personal experience. It's clear to me. When I teach men, teach women, it's night and day in this regard. As far as faith, you can see it very clearly that women by nature have a much higher are in a much higher spiritual state. I am generalizing because it's not true for all women and it's not true for all men, but as a classification of groups, I find it to be very true. And this is demonstrated when the Jews left Egypt, that it was the women who had full confidence that God was going to take care of them. So let's read text number 14. Candy, you mind reading text 14 for us? That's on page 194.
Jewish women and girls play an essential role in the highly critical mission of bringing about the true and complete redemption. The women played an indispensable role in our exodus from Egypt. Indeed, our sages state that our ancestors were redeemed from Egypt in the merit of the deeds of the righteous women. As we've discussed repeatedly, they fulfill this role in each subsequent generation. This is especially true of our present time, for we are the reincarnation of the generation that left Egypt. Indeed, we can clearly observe that Jewish women and girls are naturally predisposed, far more readily than the menfolk, to the idea of immediately leaving the exile. Less effort is required to convince them that we must leave this exile already than is required to inspire the men.
All right. So I thought it would be good it's always good to conclude the class with something relevant to reincarnation that we know is relevant to our generation. And a man should never hesitate to stand behind a woman who has strong faith. All right, everyone. So with this, we conclude tonight's class. And sad, but next Monday is our last class for this series. But don't feel so bad. We always have another series coming up. So right after Pesach, we'll be having another series. And I'll let you know about that next week. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks for joining, and see you next week, next Monday night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Very welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi.